Why does Europe, especially the EU, keep lagging behind in the global tech race? It's a question that might seem insulting at first. After all, Europe has brilliant engineers, top universities, and huge markets. But if you look closely, there's a growing gap, and it's not just a minor stumble, it's structural. Imagine two runners in a race, one, the US, sprinting on a wide, clean track, and the other, the EU, stumbling over uneven cobblestones in a maze. That's what Europe's tech ecosystem often feels like when compared to Silicon Valley. So, in this video, we're going to dig into why the EU struggles in tech. We'll explore capital, culture, regulation, talent, and more. Not to bash Europe, but to understand the economic barriers and to think about how it can catch up. Let's start with the most obvious challenge: capital. In the US, venture capital is massive, bold, and willing to bet big. In Europe, not so much. According to the IMF, Europeans invested around 57 billion euros in tech via VC in a year, versus more than 210 billion euros in the US. That's a huge gap. McKinsey's research backs this up. Even though Europe generates a large number of startups, relatively few make it past early funding rounds. European startups are about 30% less likely than US startups to go from seed to really major funding, like Series C or IPO. That means many European companies stall, not because they fail, but because they simply don't scale fast enough. Why is this capital gap so big? Part of it is risk aversion. European investors are generally more cautious. Rather than funding moonshots, many VCs in Europe prefer stable, proven business models. McKinsey pointed this out. European VCs tend to reward predictability over high-risk innovation. Another report notes that many European VCs behave more like private equity, preferring lower risk and stable returns over disruptive, risky startups. That's a problem because innovation often requires big bets. If investors pull back when things are uncertain, you lose the kinds of companies that change the world. Another big issue: fragmented markets. Unlike the US, where scaling means moving from one state to another without legal complexity, Europe is a patchwork of 27 countries in the EU, each with their own rules, languages, tax systems, and labor laws. McKinsey highlights this. For a European startup to reach a market comparable in size to the US, it often has to operate in dozens of national markets. This fragmentation slows everything: regulatory compliance, cross-border hiring, tax navigation. It all takes time and money. That makes it harder for startups to scale early. By contrast, US companies often scale quickly within a huge unified market. Because scaling in Europe means navigating different national regulators, companies often expand abroad early or even relocate, and that means talent and innovation sometimes leave the continent just to grow more easily. Then there's regulation itself, especially in tech-heavy fields like AI, data, and privacy. Europe is known for its cautious, regulation-first mindset that sounds good on paper: strong consumer protections, data rights, ethical standards. But in practice, this regulatory caution comes with big compliance costs for startups. A recent report found that many European tech firms delay or downgrade product features to meet regulatory demands. For example, some small firms reported they had to remove or simplify product capabilities just to comply with data handling rules. And it's not just theoretical. Regulation slows down product launches. In some cases, European startups face lengthy delays because they must navigate a mountain of red tape. Some argue this precautionary principle, a regulatory philosophy that prioritizes safety and risk avoidance, actually hurts European innovation. It can stifle experimentation and make it hard for frontier tech companies to take off. Labor laws are also part of the mix. In many European countries, it's harder and more expensive to hire and fire people than in the US. That makes startups more cautious about building big teams early. According to a benchmarking analysis, the protected labor environment in Europe eats into flexibility. Plus, equity compensation, a major tool for tech startups to attract talent, is less friendly in Europe. McKinsey notes that many EU countries have stock option rules that are much less appealing compared to US standards. If you're a tech founder, that's a serious disadvantage when you're trying to lure top engineers who might otherwise take a risky bet on a startup. Another layer, culture and mindset. In Silicon Valley, failure is celebrated. It's part of the journey. You fail, you learn, you try again. In many European countries, the stigma around failure is stronger. McKinsey found that the press coverage of startups in places like Germany is less supportive than in the US, and that cultural pressure pushes founders to build sustainable businesses rather than explosive growth companies. If you're only focused on building a profitable regional business, you're less likely to aim for global domination. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does make it harder to create the kind of big, world-changing tech players. Finally, there's a deep tech commercialization challenge. Europe is strong in scientific research, but turning that research into commercial, scalable companies is hard. According to a deep tech report, EU startups often face slow bureaucratic processes, confusing funding programs, and red tape. There are many public programs, EU level and national, but navigating them is a nightmare. The overlap, different criteria, long wait times. By the time a startup gets funding, the world might have moved on. For deep tech, timing is everything. So at this point, we see a pattern. Europe has many of the raw ingredients for tech greatness: talent, research, ambition, but structural barriers, regulatory complexity, risk-averse capital, and market fragmentation all conspire to slow it down. We unpack the obvious hurdles: capital, regulation, market fragmentation, labor laws, and cultural factors. But Europe's tech challenges go deeper, and some of the most critical ones are tied to talent, brain drain, and lack of role models. Let's start with talent. Europe has amazing universities producing top engineers, AI researchers, and mathematicians. Sounds perfect, right? But producing talent and keeping talent are two different things. According to a European Commission report, over 25% of Europe's top STEM graduates move abroad within 5 years to work in the US, UK, or Asia. ec.europa.eu. Why? Well, look at the opportunities. Silicon Valley offers high-risk, high-reward environments with deep capital pools, flexible labor, and an entrenched startup culture. European cities are often more risk-averse, slower to scale, and bureaucratic. A brilliant AI researcher in Berlin might make 50% more and work on more ambitious projects in San Francisco. This leads directly to brain drain. Every year, Europe loses some of its most promising founders and engineers to the US or China. And once they leave, they often start companies abroad rather than at home. That's not just a talent gap, it's an innovation gap. Now, add role models into the mix. Europe simply has fewer global tech icons. When you think of transformative tech founders, most are American. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, Sergey Brin. The EU has notable founders, but far fewer have reached the global stage. Why does this matter? Because role models drive risk appetite. They show young founders what's possible. Without enough visible success stories, the culture tilts towards safe, incremental growth instead of global ambition. Another subtle but critical factor is risk culture in finance and entrepreneurship. We mentioned Europe's cautious investors in Part 1, but it goes deeper. A Harvard Business School study found that European entrepreneurs are less likely to leave stable jobs to start a company compared to their American counterparts, hbs.edu. Think about that for a second. If even brilliant engineers hesitate to leave a secure career path, it slows down innovation. By contrast, in the US, failure is celebrated: try, fail, learn, and try again. That's the mantra. In Europe, bankruptcy laws, cultural stigma, and social safety nets often make founders play it safe. Then there's infrastructure for scaling. Europe has strong research universities and innovation labs, but translating science into commercial products is tricky. The EU invests billions in R&D, yet startups struggle to turn lab breakthroughs into scalable businesses. A 2024 report by the European Innovation Council highlighted the Valley of Death problem, the gap between research and commercialization where many promising technologies stall. EIC.ec.europa.eu. Meanwhile, the US has a culture of bridging this gap with accelerators, incubators, and private-public partnerships that are extremely well connected to global capital markets. Europe has incubators too, but they're often fragmented and underfunded. Language and fragmentation also play into scaling challenges. Europe is not just one market. Its many multilingual teams, cross-border legal complexities, and differing consumer habits make rapid scaling harder. A European startup might be able to dominate in Germany, but struggle to enter France, Spain, or Italy efficiently. That delay can be fatal in fast-moving tech sectors. Let's also talk about late adoption of platform thinking. Most of Europe's tech ecosystem has been service-oriented, focusing on consulting, manufacturing tech, and enterprise B2B solutions. The US, by contrast, has mastered consumer platforms and network effects. Facebook, Google, Amazon, and now AI-based platforms. Platform businesses scale exponentially. European tech has a few examples, like Spotify or Klarna, but not enough. This is partly due to market incentives. US companies chase global domination from day one. European founders often focus on national or regional dominance because scaling is cumbersome. And without massive global ambitions, it's harder to attract the level of venture capital needed to compete with US giants. Finally, let's not ignore the regulatory paradox. Europe's strong rules protect consumers and data privacy, which is good, but can make European startups less competitive globally. When a European AI startup wants to develop generative AI or a big data platform, strict privacy laws can slow experiments that American counterparts execute in months. This isn't just a timing issue, it's a competitive one. If you're 6 months slower, you lose market share and mind share in a tech sector where first movers dominate. Despite all this, there are glimmers of hope. Cities like Berlin, Stockholm, and Paris are growing tech hubs. EU funding is increasing for AI, and deep tech European startups like UiPath, Northvolt, and Klarna show that scaling globally can happen. The challenge is systemic. Europe needs better capital markets, a more risk-tolerant culture, stronger scaling infrastructure, and policies that encourage global ambition. So far, we've explored why Europe lags behind in tech. Limited venture capital, fragmented markets, heavy regulation, cautious investors, brain drain, and a culture that values stability over risk. But now the big question, can Europe catch up? The answer is maybe, but it's going to take bold moves. First, capital reform. Europe needs bigger, risk-tolerant venture funds that are willing to make large bets on moonshot ideas. The US has institutional investors who pour billions into startups that may fail 9 out of 10 times. And Europe needs that same mentality. Governments and private investors are starting to recognize this. The European Innovation Council is expanding funding for high-risk, high-reward projects, which could help eic.ec.europa.eu. Next, market harmonization. The EU is slowly working toward reducing fragmentation through initiatives like the digital single market. If successful, startups could scale across borders more easily, reducing the friction that currently slows growth. One day, a startup in Barcelona could seamlessly sell to Berlin, Paris, and Milan without massive legal overhead. That's crucial for competing with Silicon Valley, where scaling nationally is simple. Europe also needs to embrace a culture of risk and failure. This is harder to legislate, but governments, universities, and media can help by highlighting entrepreneurial success stories, even those that fail spectacularly but teach lessons. If young founders see risk as an opportunity instead of a career-ending mistake, innovation accelerates. Talent retention is another piece. Europe can't just produce brilliant engineers. It needs to give them compelling reasons to stay. Competitive salaries, stock option-friendly laws, easier mobility between countries, and strong startup ecosystems can help. Some countries, like Estonia and Germany, are experimenting with tax incentives for stock options and easier work visas for foreign talent. These small but strategic steps can help reverse the brain drain. Then there's deep tech commercialization. Europe excels in research but struggles to bring products to market. Streamlining funding programs, connecting labs to investors, and creating efficient incubators could make a huge difference. The key is reducing bureaucratic delays and making it easier for a scientist to go from lab to scalable product. Finally, Europe must think global from day one. Startups should be encouraged to aim beyond national borders. That means designing products for international markets, hiring multilingual teams, and cultivating investors who understand global competition. The continent has the resources, talent, and research. It just needs the mindset and support systems to compete. There are already success stories proving it's possible: Spotify, Klarna, UiPath, Northvolt. These companies scaled globally despite European challenges. They show that with the right mix of talent, funding, and vision, European startups can play in the same league as Silicon Valley giants. Europe won't overtake the US overnight. The structural challenges are real and deeply rooted. But with regulatory reforms, better capital allocation, cultural shifts, and smarter talent policies, Europe can stop lagging and start innovating at scale. Here's the takeaway. Europe doesn't lack talent or brains. It lacks speed, scale, and risk appetite. Fix those, and the EU could finally go from playing catch-up to defining the next wave of tech innovation. So, what do you think? Can Europe reclaim its place as a tech powerhouse, or is the US simply too far ahead? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into global finance and tech trends. And if you enjoyed this video, check out our other content where we break down markets, economics, and tech with clarity and insight. The race isn't over. Europe might just be getting its second wind.